Looks like we're live. Howdy, howdy. Welcome to the Privacy Show. We've got Raju and Brent still here. I haven't scared anyone off yet. I was actually, just to start off real quick, I was talking to one of the privacy guys at the company, and I was telling him, we'll get you on the show. And he was like, you don't think it's ironic that you're talking about privacy and then you're going to put me in front of all these people and kind of out me and all that? And I was like, yeah, I kind of understand the point, but maybe we'll have something to protect you later down the line. We'll find some like voice masking feature or maybe an avatar we can throw up. But yeah, welcome to the show again. Just a weird story to start off. I think we're getting a little bit better. We're going to organize this in kind of two sections. For today's show, we'll start out with some privacy news for the week, and then we'll go into kind of our main topic we're going to dive a little deeper into. So we'll start off with kind of this week in privacy, what's been going on, what's new. Go at a fancy slide now.
We need a little like mood music or something as we bring that guy.
So, I mean, starting off, first thing, I think earlier in the week, maybe Monday or Tuesday, DuckDuckGo announced that they're doing an email protection feature. I think it's still in beta. So, I mean, I requested through the app. I think that was the only way to really do it. But it seems like this is kind of going to be a trend. I mean, after Apple's last keynote, they announced that iCloud Plus stuff for email protection, and DuckDuckGo's in it. So this email stuff seems to be quite the maybe rage or hype circle for right now, right? What do you guys think?
It certainly is a good move, no doubt, and it solves half the problem. Where there is a stripping an email content with all the tracking pixels, embed codes, or whatnot, loading images and whatnot. Serves the client-side part of it. Then when the email service itself is provided by, let's say, a surveillance provider, then they still have access to that email, no matter how that is loaded. And the contents of the email are typically passed, and based on that, ads are shown. So the back end of it is still not solved. So it certainly solves the front end part of it, and this definitely helps, no question about it. But then there is always two sides to it. So if, let's say, somebody is using an email provider that doesn't do ads, and there are a bunch of them, right? Like Hey.com does it, Fastmail does it, Zoho Mail does it, and there are 10, 20 other providers out there. May not be well known, but these are the ones that are not into the business of running advertising, right? So scanning and whatnot. So if you use that provider, number one, and number two, if you use something like this to front end it, then you're well protected.
Just think of how many interactions and conversations are still flowing through email. I mean, everybody's been trying to kill off email for like at least 5 or 10 years. Every new channel that comes on, that means the death of email. But I think, if I'm not mistaken, we had that slide a couple of weeks ago that talked about the Internet Minute. And in 2021, there are more emails flying around every minute of the day than there were in previous years. So that means I think even it's not going away.
Yeah, I feel like even last year there was probably an uptick in, like, I guess maybe the rise of Substack in general and just email newsletters for various topics. And so there's a couple, I guess, email newsletters that got really big, like Hustle and Morning Brew are two really big ones. I think Hustle got sold to HubSpot, if I'm not mistaken, for probably a good penny. So clearly there's a big market for value-added newsletters compared to just like the there's a 20% off sale at Pottery Barn this week. Those types of emails, right? And so I think the email, maybe it could be coming full circle, it's going away from advertising emails of just promos to actually like maybe valuable emails. Who knows?
Yeah, but don't hate on Pottery Barn though, Tejas.
I mean, 20% off is 20% off. I need 50% off though.
Yeah, but it doesn't seem like email, whatever you're putting in it, if it's newsletters or what have you, it's not losing momentum. It's still a very active channel. And so privacy has to really be taken seriously in the email applications that we're using. And so that I look at this as a very positive step, and one that, maybe email isn't as sexy as it used. Well, am I about to say email is sexy? Let me stop myself right there. Maybe it's not as upfront because of all the other channels that are kind of taking some of its shine, but it's still like the backbone of particularly most business interactions. So privacy, email, it really should be taken very seriously and addressed at like something like this is doing.
Yeah, I think one of these days we'll have to do maybe a deeper dive on just email analytics, tracking how I guess the email kind of entire system works, because it definitely has a lot of intricacies and a lot of complications. I feel like most, either this DuckDuckGo one or the Apple one, or even some of the vendors that Raju provided, maybe you have a better idea. But it's mostly these like tracking pixels or images that get loaded, and then based on that, image being loaded, they know a lot of information about it. And so these services basically load it maybe in their cloud and then proxy that image back down to you. That's maybe technologically kind of how it goes.
Likely. I mean, I didn't dig into any of these providers, but these are, some providers do this better than others. But I think the trend is obvious. There is a demand for it. And increasingly, the popularity of these vendors shows that people are conscious about their privacy, and they're tired of some of these tricks being played on them.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes it's good. I've opened emails and then I get an email a day later, get with an even bigger discount, right? So in some ways it works. But yeah, for sure. In general, I think a lot of people don't even know that emails are tracked probably. Maybe the average non-technical person might not realize that these emails even send information back, and someone can tell if it opened or where they are or what browser they're using or any information about them. I think that might even be the first step of just being aware of that issue, right?
Yeah, we're very early days into this kind of the awareness of the issue. I mean, let's face it, a lot of users are just kind of, we get to use this stuff for free and don't worry about what free means, as we've been saying constantly on these episodes. But I think as more people become aware and they start to dig in, this is just we're at the tip of the iceberg, and these companies are going to have to, like we always say, it's like the customer is going to be the one that drives the change, and the more they become aware of what's going on, the more they're going to take the mantles, and companies are going to have to respond. They might not have responded before because they didn't have to. I think
there are two layers. Not just email, or if you look at any tool for any service for that matter, there is a tool part of it, there is a data part of it. Email, the tool might be free, but then the monetization may be happening at the data layer. In some cases, there are vendors that charge for the tool and make money, and then they double dip and sell the data and make money. And in email's case, there are free emails, but the money is made from the data. So, and in some cases, maybe both could be free, and they might be making money off of some of the channels. So it varies. You can look at a vendor's business model and the tool to understand what they're doing. And in every industry and every vertical, that is different and varies by the tool too.
Yeah, that makes sense. Let's see, what else do we have? Yesterday, there was kind of a big internet outage. I guess quite a few websites got affected. I think it was one of these edge DNS providers. I forgot the name of them, but yeah, basically DNS outage took out a large chunk of the internet. Akamai, yeah.
Akamai,
I think this is nothing, frankly, new. We have seen that in the past with Cloudflare. We have seen that with various other DNS providers. It is common. But if you zoom out and look at it, I'm seeing it is what we have done is we have centralized the decentralized internet. So, internet is supposed to be decentralized, but a few vendors now control, a good chunk of the internet. Take DNS providers. Maybe there are about 10 big DNS providers out there. In between Cloudflare and Akamai, throw in Google DNS service and Amazon's AWS DNS service and a few others. They probably, again, I'm just guessing here, they probably control 30 to 50% of the lookups. That's, again, for a decentralized internet, that's too centralization. I think, and we will see the implications like this when one provider goes down. What happens when, let's say, AWS or some other service provider that controls a good portion of it is impacted? And in some cases, some of these providers are, ad providers themselves. They are surveillance providers themselves. When they know, what lookup you're doing, well, they have a lot more information about you. They have information about every single service, every single website you're visiting, every single lookup you're doing, right? So there are privacy implications to that as well. But that entire thing has to be looked at, and each vendor has to look at the implications. And this is really deep when it comes to how end-to-end the surveillance is, right from your computer to your router to the network to the DNS lookup to the hosting thing. There is a point of presence for some of the surveillance providers where they track users end-to-end.
So just to maybe rewind a little bit, if you don't know what DNS is, maybe we should explain that a little bit more. At a very maybe elementary explanation, it's basically kind of like a phone book or contact app in your phone. You look up a website, google.com, whatever, and then it translates that back to an IP address, which is where that service is actually stored or where it's being served from. And so imagine someone kind of looking over your shoulder every time you open the phone book or open the contacts app to text somebody or call somebody. They can see who's accessing what website by providing that basically directory service. Essentially, is that kind of how it works, right?
Pretty much. So the IP address is like your phone number. It's easy to recognize someone by a name rather than a phone number. Just the same way, it's easy to recognize, say, google.com or apple.com instead of remembering their IP address. So it is that lookup is what DNS service does.
And these private providers basically can see what's going on with every single lookup, essentially.
Absolutely.
Yeah. That's kind of tricky because then ultimately every website someone's going to, obviously, right?
Yeah, and remember, some of these providers, why is Google interested in providing, let's say, your router? Not just Google, or why is Amazon selling your routers? Why is some of the other companies selling you routers for your home, right? Well, that is where the lookup happens in a lot of cases. So right from the source, they are interested in that data. So there is tracking that is happening right from your computer level, that is maybe from the browser, and then to the lookup to all the way where the website is served from.
I have Google Fiber Internet at home, so they got the pipe.
Then you don't have to worry about privacy. They just you're taken care of.
But I mean, any internet provider, I guess Google probably just being the worst or the more obvious thing, but it's not like AT&T or Comcast or Time Warner don't do basically the same game, right?
I don't think they're any better either. I think a lot of providers exchange this information and they don't care much for privacy. I think that is certainly a challenge. These days, when I was buying a TV, I was looking for a dumb TV, I guess, not a smart TV. None. And if I can, and I'm forced to connect my TV to the network to update software or whatnot. And I don't trust this. So they're scanning all the network devices that are there in my network and passing it along, and I don't have any control of it. The same way, you don't have any control on the data that some of these service providers are exchanging between themselves.
Maybe the thing that kind of makes Google a special case is when you just talked about internet access. But I remember last year I saw something that said that Google has 7 different applications that have at least 1 billion different users. When you think about Gmail and you think about the Chrome browser, you think about Android. So they're able to connect lots of information, including now the information on how you're accessing the internet, and that's an opportunity to aggregate a lot of data from a lot of activities and interactions that we have as individuals and piece it all together.
And that's exactly what their main product is, Brent. That's called Google Ads. They have taken all of these billion user properties, and the common thread across all of this is essentially a combination of Google Ads and DoubleClick and whatnot. And that is the common thread across the board. That's their main product.
And then let's see, what else do we really have then outside of that? There was a Twitter privacy policy update, terms of service update, something along those lines. I remember seeing it in the app on my phone. Yeah, there you go. I got a screenshot of it, Brent.
Yeah.
Did you actually click through the links and see what they changed?
Well, the first thing I did, I was on my my iPhone and pulled up the Twitter app and got greeted by this, and you notice you either say okay or you can't use the app anymore. So it's like how you got to say okay before you really know what you're saying okay to, unless you go to the Twitter Privacy Center. And look, this is the first time I actually did this. I did this because privacy has taken on a whole new thing for me in the last year or so. So this is the first time I actually did not just go right to okay and hit let me try the Twitter Privacy Center. And so this is kind of takes you to this page. It's actually a blog post that went up on, I believe it was on Tuesday. So you could we got the URL here, so you can actually go and check this out. But I took a couple of screenshots of some of the things that caught my attention in the update and the things that are changing. And so Twitter Spaces, I think the last time they did update, I don't think really Twitter Spaces was even really a thing, or at least wasn't a thing that was public. So now they are accounting for what's going on with Twitter Spaces. And for those who don't know what Twitter Spaces is, if you are familiar at all with Clubhouse, it's like an audio, what do they call it now? Social audio or drop-in audio, where you can start an audio conversation on the Twitter platform, and supposedly people that you're connected to get notified, and they can come in, they can either listen or you can promote them to be a speaker. So all of a sudden, instead of 100 or 280 characters of text, now you're able to talk, and you could have guests talk. And so it could be a lot of people talking. Well, all that talking gets transcribed into actual text. And so what you're seeing here is, we analyze data from Spaces to provide audio transcripts. So there it is. There's the transcripts to review for potential violations. That's what they said. But, it doesn't really say what else they could do with those audio transcriptions, because not only are they transcripts, they know who's saying what, when they're saying it, what device they're saying on, like we kind of just talked about. There's a lot of data that all of a sudden was not at Twitter's disposal that is now at Twitter's disposal, and they had to update their policy. But and as they say, all spaces are currently public. Your presence in a space and anything you broadcast is public. So basically you're saying it's up for grabs. What are you guys saying?
And there is the way, if you look at something like an audio transcription, right, it is likely that Twitter has developed their own technology for doing this audio transcription. They're big. I'm assuming that is the case. What happens in a lot of companies, particularly small companies that don't have the same expertise, what they do is they use some other third party for doing this audio transcription. So which means this audio files passed on to another third party who does audio transcriptions, and you get that in return. And we don't have visibility on the business model of those companies, right? Basically, this is a data leak from one vendor to another vendor. Now, transcriptions is one part. The same applies for translation. What if you're speaking in a different language, and that audio is transcribed to, let's say, a Japanese or a Spanish or any language, and then that is translated? And does the vendor build their own translation engine, or do they depend on third-party translation engine? If so, how good are those translation engines? So typically, they go to a third-party translation engines, and who knows what those business models are for those. As a user, you may not know that the length of that chain out there, and where the leaks are in each of these points. That is an unknown in a lot of these services out there.
I mean, I think, if I'm not mistaken, I'm pretty sure Google and Amazon both have transcription and translation services, either through AWS or GCP. I'm sure Azure has something as well. So usually the bigger cloud providers have this service that they offer, and then there's probably some smaller vendors that do something similar.
Yes, in a lot of those cases, the relevant translate tool is the free. I was saying the tool part is the free. The data part is what is monetized. That's why the tool itself is free. So that is the reason such tools get popular. So what happens is when a smaller vendor doesn't have a translation thing, they depend on some of these bigger providers to get the translation done. In return, your data is compromised.
Right.
And so how deep and how open are they about all the possible leaks, data leaks, is something that vendors or customers have to look at.
All right, I'm going to go up to the next bullet point here around autoplay. Now I know, we upload video clips to Twitter, and depending on what your setting is, in the default setting, I think is autoplay. It automatically starts. So this was interesting. It says we recently updated the way audio videos on autoplay work on Twitter. When you watch or interact with content from these partners, so they have third parties, uploading video, and if you're set to default to on, that means you're getting, the third party is actually getting you to a certain extent. When you watch or interact with content from these partners, they may receive and process some data as described in their privacy policy. So immediately it's spooling out of hand. I mean, if you are on the default setting of autoplay on, this is already taking place.
It goes back to the same point, but the chain of data linkages in the privacy thread that is unknown, and I think there has to be a way where vendors should talk about who has access to your data. They have to be open about it. I think we have to get to that stage. We're not there. We're not even close to it.
Last one here I wanted to bring up to you guys. Payments. We may receive information about your transactions now that they're having premium services. So people are going to start having to pay, and they're going to use some kind of payment service to pay. So we may receive information about your transactions, such as when it was made or when it is set to expire or auto renew. So all of a sudden, whenever there's, let's say, a new feature or function or anything, the data involved changes, and that makes them have to change. And we're not just talking about Twitter specifically. Any service you use, basically, when they do a feature or a new update or new feature or new whatever, there's a data implication to that. And that data implication is something that I think a lot of us users have, at least over the past years, kind of just shrugged at or said, well, whatever, I just want to use the service. But you really have to start thinking about the data implications and who this data might end up getting into their hands.
Yeah, as long as that exchange is transparent. I think we talked about that last time too. Like I'm using Twitter for free. I kind of understand they're going to take something and show me ads for it, but I guess what they're showing, how clearly they explain it to me, that's kind of the important. Then I can choose to opt in or opt out, right? Ultimately, would it kind of be fair if I went through my Twitter settings, turned off all my tracking, and said no, but then still use the service for free, right? If they don't want people like that, they can just not allow free users or not allow that option, which is ultimately what ends up happening, right? But it's just not very transparent for what is actually collected. And then, like Raju was talking about, that underlying data layer, where the connections are made, how that information is kind of weaved together in order to paint a different kind of picture about your user profile, essentially.
I got one more. I just forgot. This might be the most important one. They actually updated their policy to say this: Twitter does not sell your personal data.
That might be the most misleading line of any company out there, right? Because I mean, I think it's covered by legalese, so it may not sell your data, but it might give it to somebody for free in exchange for some other data. And people don't really understand. There's I would say maybe data warehouses or like the ad platforms themselves, Twitter, Facebook, Google. The probably biggest misconception is they're not in the game of selling data. They're in the game of buying data and collecting it, because they serve the ad platform. It's the other vendors that sell data to these massive ad networks rather than the other way around. So that first line makes you feel good, but it is not really what's, I guess, the whole truth, right?
I would agree. All right, that's all I had for that. I just thought that was really, it hadn't been in there before, and apparently now it is. So that's kind of interesting. All right.
Yeah, so then I guess we can dive deeper into kind of our topic for today. And the reason it kind of popped up in my mind is what do you call it? We were looking at a house in Austin actually, and trying to find something. The market's kind of wild, but just looking around. And I was looking at one of the sample contracts that was sent over, and I found like a little paragraph in the contract that talks about sharing of contact information. And I think it's fairly standard. I asked my realtor too. I was like, "Hey, is this like normal and just like normal contracts?" And he was like, "Yeah." And I asked like the real estate agent, like the housing guy, and like the selling agent or whatever. He was like, "Yeah, this is just a standard like normal contract." And it talks about how like the seller can basically take my personal data, like my name, email address, phone number, and even potentially financial information, and share it to their quote partners for promotional services. And they list off things like maybe utilities and things along those lines, but really you don't know where it's actually ending up. And then I was like, well, I don't want to sign this. Like, can I opt out of this clause or something? Like, no, you don't have a choice. Like, that's your standard blue book contract kind of situation. Then I started going down kind of the rabbit hole of how does this financial information really kind of get swashed around? And one of the first things I came across was, I guess, there's a lot of different areas, but first thing, I think a lot of it kind of ends up, if we were to sum it up into two main points, I think Intuit and probably credit scores are probably two of the biggest threads that everything kind of connects to, more or less. And so Intuit, as you know, like they own QuickBooks, they own TurboTax, they own Mint.com. They recently bought Credit Karma, yeah. So quite the portfolio of applications, I would say. QuickBooks is probably used by, I would imagine, the vast majority of accountants in America, probably. And TurboTax probably used by a vast majority of Americans to file their taxes. And you've just got this right up here. So they share payroll data from Intuit to Equifax, which does credit reporting. And so we were talking about this the other day. So certain employers will do credit checks on employees when they hire them, right? And in some sense, it might make sense. Maybe you're a highly regulated industry, maybe banking, finance, stuff like that. It might be required. But then there's certain industries where it's completely crazy that they would even care, like a normal employer would care about credit checks and stuff like that. But I mean, you didn't really agree to having your payroll data shared, and it got shared, and there's nothing you can really do about it, I guess, is the bottom line, right?
Yeah, there are, if you zoom out and look at, let's say, something like Equifax or some of these credit report agencies, they have a lot of data about it, like the credit scores is being one. They also have a lot of data about your spending thing, how many credit cards you have, how much loans you have, and whatnot. So they have the spend side of the equation. What they're trying to get is the income side of the equation. So now Intuit is sharing that data to these vendors, and looks like ADP already sends that data to them. So now they have this data as a service. It is one thing when a government does it, but it's the other thing when there's a private company who has income data as well as some of the money in and money out of every single citizen, almost every single citizen in the country. And especially if the track record says they've I would say leaked about 145 million people's data more recently. And now they are aggregating income data, launching income verification service, payroll or verification service. What could go wrong?
I mean, the Equifax thing is crazy because these guys, like you said, they leaked the data, and then there might have been like half of a news cycle on it, but nobody cared. I think the total fine ended up being something like 500, maybe 700 million, which I think I remember filling out like the join the class action or whatever, and I think it was saying that the payout would be maybe $7 to $13 or something along those lines. And so you get fined 700 million or 500 million, whatever, and their revenue is something like 5 billion, 4 billion, give or take, right? I mean, that's like pennies really in the bucket in the grand scheme of things, right? And you don't sign up for a credit checking service, but Equifax automatically collects this entire thing for you. And we all just kind of live with this credit check system. And and nobody. I mean, I think people don't like it, but you don't really have a choice. And you never opted into them collecting information about you. You never signed up for their service. Yet they control pretty much how you can plan your investments. If you can get a house, if you can get a credit card, if you can sometimes get a job, if you can rent a place, and you had zero control, or a lot of people zero interaction ever with the credit companies, right? You just think that there's a magical number out there that gets calculated and basically judges your credit worthiness with zero opt-in of data, but they somehow collected everything about you, right?
No, absolutely. And I mean, that is one side of the story, which is, Equifax and whatnot. And then there is other side of the story where, like this month, I believe Intuit was in the news where sharing that data, payroll data with, and ADP does that, right? If you look at that side of the equation, it goes back to how do they get that information? They get the information because they offer a payroll tool, right? So again, it goes back to tool and data. So they sell you payroll tool, and they take the data and then they sell the payroll data. In this case,
you're paying for the payroll tool. Yeah,
you're paying for the tool, and then they're making money off of the data as well. You're really paying them to screw you. That's another way to put it, because you're giving them, paying, and also giving them, and also getting screwed because of some of these business models, and those business models are very prevalent in the industry, unfortunately. In fact, interestingly, we were looking at a payroll provider for one of our other offices in a different country, and that was the time this one came up. And we did not realize that, in fact, ADP was on the short list. We did not realize that the data is sent out. We took it off the list and said, and as an employer, we basically say, these are the things that we have to do. And now that is part of a checklist. Our data for our employees and their payroll data should not be sold. If it is, that vendor is out. I think businesses should add something like this to their checklist when they evaluate vendors. Where is the data leaking? Secondly, the employees should basically make sure that, or ask what's happening with their data, and they should question the employer about it. An employer should have the right answer for that. So once these two checks are in place, everything else down the lane will be taken care of. That's where that education is needed for both the employers as well as employees.
I just wanted to also, being a Credit Karma customer well before they were acquired by Intuit. And then, of course, Mint was acquired by Intuit years ago. It's almost sort of like a Google kind of approach to financial information.
I mean, yeah, Mint is giving you, you enter all your bank data, right? And you give them every transaction, you give them permanent access, basically, unless you go and revoke it manually and stuff like that. So, I mean, then they just have a rolling tally of every single expense you've ever made, right? Location, time, merchant, all that stuff.
And also with Credit Karma, I mean, the whole idea of that is you get that free weekly credit score check, and you put in a lot of information. You're putting in your social security card number, you're putting in your bank accounts, you're putting in the credit cards, and that you're basically giving all this stuff. And originally it's like, okay, yeah, well, I'll do it. But then when you see the acquisition chain start happening, it's like, wow, well, I'm already using TurboTax and QuickBooks, and well, I was using Mint and before it was acquired. Well, geez, I'm using Credit Karma, and now that's okay. So all this stuff is actually, before it was kind of spread out. Now it's all being brought together, and when you're using TurboTax, you do get an offer for Mint. Do you want to use this service here? Or do you want to get you want to get a credit card a year? We can give you your best odds and options for the best credit card for you by you joining Credit Karma.
I think it gives you like an approval percentage too. So it'll tell you like how likely you are to be
percentage. It gives you if you want to lower your auto insurance. Mm-hmm. So there's all these different things that kind of entice you to provide more data. And originally it was like over here and over here and over there, but now you're seeing how they're like triangulating this data under one roof, and what can be done. Not only what is being done, but what can be done, and how far out can your data go in the hands these companies that you have no direct relationship with, and you might not even know what's even possible and who has access to it. It's really kind of getting very complex to keep up with all this stuff.
And we have transitioned from a tool as a product to data as a product, and that is a key part. And now, when you productize data, when you have a lot of data, then you split it into multiple products. Like one of the product is like income verification service, right? That's a product. Employment verification service, and so credit score is essentially a product of that data as a product. That is essentially the industry is going, but they're not open about it to the consumers. They think they're giving a tool either for free or a paid, but instead what's happening is you transition to data as a product.
Yeah, there was also, I want to say a couple of years ago, not just between like Intuit and the credit companies, but also I think 2018, 2017, Facebook tried to get some information. I know Google had some executive or some employee leak information about how they wanted a partnership with Mastercard, or I think the partnership did get inked, if I'm not mistaken, where your transaction data from there is linked back to Google, which has access to like your online receipts from things you purchase online. Yeah, so then you got your online, everything you buy online, a receipt gets sent to you via email. They know you bought something. They so brazenly make that little card at the top a lot of the time says like, your little receipt, and they'll show you like the amount, the merchant, and kind of they'll collect it. So it's kind of like in your face, right? Like we scanned that email, we picked out the information that will make it look pretty to you, but that's just what we're going to do with that information and store it in the back end. And now they can obviously associate offline purchases. So then every single purchase you make that's not with cash or Bitcoin, basically, you basically have completely tracked that then gets attributed back to an ad or gets fed back into the ad network, right? You wouldn't spend money to make a partnership if you weren't going to get an ROI on it, right?
Totally.
Yeah, we're as more because of the pandemic, a lot of these transactions that were, just not digital, that you could just walk in with actual cash and buy something, and they don't even have to know who you are, just that you have enough money to buy it, and then you walk out. There's less and less of that going on, and because there's more digital, capabilities with these transactions, this stuff, it's gonna be really difficult to kind of keep up with it. But I think, as a consumer, it's on you, because you want to make sure that you at least have enough of an understanding of what's going on, enough of an understanding to question and to determine what do you want to be a part of going forward. And at least we're starting to see that, the focus on these things happening, because before a lot of this stuff was happening, under the cover of darkness. And I think now that consumers are starting to become more aware and starting to get a little bit more of an idea of what's going on. Do you think we're at a point where vendors who have traditionally played in this area, are they going to be able to make the transition? Are we going to start, you start thinking about that old saying about, if you look at the S&P 500 15 years ago, or the Fortune 500 15 years ago, only like 20 of them are left or something like that. Is privacy going to be a bigger shakeup, or create as big a shakeup as some of the things that have happened in the past with companies that were the big guys on top, but because this thing happened, there's a whole new group of big companies on top?
It's likely the direction. We have seen that, going back to our email discussion, most of the email providers are also, to some extent, surveillance providers. But we have seen privacy-centric email providers. We've seen a good number of those. The evolution of that shows that there is a demand. The same thing is likely happened in the financial industry. The vendors and employers, or in this case, employees, will force their employers to choose, payroll providers that take privacy seriously. Similarly, the same thing with credit card companies. There will be credit cards that will come up who don't abuse their data, who don't sell the user's data. It's just a matter of time, and I think that is the obvious way, because it is becoming a really blatant abuse of user privacy. And I think the pendulum will swing back. I'm very optimistic on that. It may take a little bit of time, but we are still in the early stages of that.
It might be. I mean, maybe you're a little more optimistic than I am, but I think just like in probably the last 5-7 years, we've seen like a big rise in fintech in general, and most of these fintech disruptors or whatever, a lot of it is a big data play, right? A big one was what was it? Visa tried to buy Plaid, which does authentication for these accounts. So like we talked about Mint, you enter your bank details and then it'll connect to your bank and get all the information. Plaid was basically a middleware service that did that authentication with banks. There's another company called Yodlee, I think. Yodlee does the same thing. And Yodlee, I think if you Google Yodlee data sharing, you just get like a hot list of like Yodlee signs agreement with JP Morgan, Yodlee signs an agreement with Citi, data sharing agreements left and right? And so technically, there was one quote that I saw from, I think their CPO, Chief Product Officer, and it says Yodlee can tell you down to the day how much the water bill was across 25,000 citizens of San Francisco, or the daily spending at McDonald's throughout the country. That's what Yodlee can tell you, which is just the middleware for the people that opted into connecting their accounts. And so I think the rise of fintech in general, and maybe the lack of awareness of privacy, which is obviously why we try to do a lot more or make this a more, I would say, understandable topic. Basically, I think we need to increase the awareness for privacy a lot more before the products try to basically commoditize or monopolize certain industries where you've gone too far and you can't get out of it. Like, do I think we'll ever get out of Experian and credit checks? I think we're too deep in that circle, and it would take a lot of effort to move our way back out of it. But this might be one of those kind of teetering moments where we can choose the pivot. Are we going to, go privacy conscious, or are we going to like succumb to these surveillance services that we don't really have a choice to and just kind of give up on it?
Can I ask you guys one last question? I know Tejas, you're the host, but I just want to ask you guys this question. So we all have seen, the whole digital transformation, thing over the last, 17 months. It's accelerated. It's gotten bigger. Everybody's talking about it. Is there a privacy transformation that is attached to the digital transformation, or is it separate? And as digital transformation takes off at this rate, maybe privacy kind of goes like this?
I think digital transformation is ahead of privacy for now. Also, at this point, I would say privacy is a luxury. It will become a common thing over a period of time. We care about privacy here in US. If you go to a developing country where they don't have any tools, they'll take any tool, and privacy is way down the lane. So it depends on where you are. So privacy is a luxury, but fast forward a few years, it will become necessary for every region, every country, and whatnot. It's a matter of time, and I truly believe that.
Yeah, maybe for companies, privacy initiatives become part of like, corporate social responsibility programs, where basically that's how you, essentially earn goodwill or show that you have a soul, and you're not just kind of a corporation. It should be part of those good initiatives you do, because like what you said, it's a luxury. Finding a service, paying for a service rather than paying for your data, it's hard to justify that as an individual, as a company. So it's definitely a luxury good, which is unfortunate, because obviously the less fortunate, are the ones who get exploited the most. And especially in the finance world, those are the people that get hit the hardest, because you're already in a bad spot. Your data, you can't afford to pay for a lot of these things, obviously, and your data is being used a lot of times against you, right? And you would have no idea. They're not there to help you out. They're there to, the services that are buying the data and organizing it and utilizing it, they're, profit maximizing machines, naturally, right? I mean, it's their business model to do it. That's why they're buying the data.
And just like employees want to work for companies that take sustainability seriously, they will want to work for companies that take privacy seriously. And that's an incentive for employers to take it seriously, because that's what their employees ask for. And that's also the right thing to do if you're not a surveillance company, that is.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and probably a good note to kind of just end on in general. Just people will start taking it a lot more seriously, and organizations that focus on it, or employees that make that a priority, will be that force of change. So I think it's just gonna keep fighting the good fight. Well, I guess that's it. We'll take the head nods as that's all, folks. And we'll wrap up. We'll do this again next week and keep them coming. And I was told last time, I'm not a YouTube professional by any means, but like, share, subscribe is apparently one of the common things you say at the end of a video to help boost viewership. So please do like, share, subscribe if you enjoy what you see, and if you have feedback or comments, topics you think you want to hear covered. I guess comments on the videos and stuff like that are always good. Maybe we'll create an email alias or something, or some kind of form online to collect information or feedback from people as well. But ultimately, hopefully this was helpful, and see you again next week.
Yeah. Hey, just go and watch the Olympics, man. They're waiting for
I know. You took me away for an hour. I got to go back and see what's playing right now. All right. Go Team USA. Adios, guys.